Good evening again, everyone. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the Public Programs Producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's book talk for I Am André, German Jew, French resistance fighter, British spy, as part of our Stories Survive series. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you again for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able to, you will visit the museum in person to see our current and upcoming exhibitions, including Art of Freedom, the life and work of Arthur Szyk, which opened recently on December 7th, 2025. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speaker during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Again, that's the Zoom Q&A box rather than the chat. Now, today we are honored to be joined by Diana Mara Henry. Diana Mara Henry has devoted her professional life to social causes and political movements. She grew up speaking French and attended the Lycée Français de New York. Her concentration at university was in government, and she was an editor at the Harvard Crimson. Her first great accomplishment was in photojournalism. After her initial visit to the Natzweiler concentration camp in 1985, her independent scholarship focused on the camp and its political prisoners. André Joseph Scheinmann and Diana worked together to create this final version of his memoirs. And after he was gone, she discovered much of his past that remained in the shadows. She has been invited to present at academic conferences around the world to speak about Natzweiler and about André, but she came to know him best through her work on this book, as seen at her website, iamandre.live. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll now hand things over to Diana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Isabel, and the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, for the honor of speaking with you tonight. I'm humbled also on behalf of the man I wrote about. And I want to acknowledge the ones we lost. André lost his parents in the Fury. I lost my French family in the massacre by French fascists at Guéry. And you are no doubt remembering your experiences too, your loved ones, and so many will never know. How is this man's story the same and yet different as each precious one is? André was personally involved as an interpreter in dealings with the German High Command and with the highest levels of the British Secret Services. Operating among the first networks of the resistance in France, he crossed the channel on assignment as an MI6 agent. Later in the concentration camps, turning the narrative of the righteous Gentile on its head, he saved non-Jews at KL Natzweiler and at Dachau. I look forward to your questions. André's memoir, which is the first part of the book, is the guide to the history. Then in the second part, I bring forward what he didn't say, and you will see how I discovered much of that and how I documented it. Let's start now with how I discovered André. As Isabel Molina mentioned, I first studied the Natzweiler concentration camp when I went there in 1985 with my father to look into our Alsatian Jewish heritage. And then I visited the camp at least half a dozen times after that. And so this is a photograph from 2016 of a school group entering the camp. In 1994, at the occasion of our 25th reunion at Harvard, I met André because his son had reached out to me. Michel Scheinmann gave me an introduction to his father, and when I heard his father's story, I offered to help him edit his memoir and present it. I didn't realize that it would take 30 years, and neither did Andre. But we spent until 2001 at his death working on the memoir, and then afterwards, I worked on the rest of the story that I then discovered. So Andre had many names and many aliases. These are some of the ways that he was known during the war through his aliases, and I'll explain a lot of those. But really, the one that I focus on the most, and the one that is the title for the second part of the book, is Cher Camarade, for his relationship with his agents. Here is a map of Andre's places that I created. You can see it's quite compact between Munich, where he was born, in Germany, to Dusseldorf, where his family moved when he was a young boy, and then over to Bruay-en-Artois in northern France, and then over after the French defeat to Rennes, which you can see on the Breton Peninsula, and then up to London from Saint-Pabu in 1942, and then through prisons at Angers and Fresnes near Paris, and then over to concentration camp Natzweiler, and then Dachau before liberation. So Andre grew up in Germany, where his father, starting in 1924, began speaking against Hitler to veterans groups around Germany. You can see Max on the right. I'm sorry, the PowerPoint advances like this. His mother, Regina, is on the left, and his sister, Mady, is seen with him on the bottom left and on the bottom right. They were very close. In the summer of 1939, with war approaching, Max took Mady, his daughter, to the US, and she married a cousin. And they attempted after that, Mady and her husband, Dr. Scheinmann, also named Scheinmann, to get visas for their parents. And the State Department wrote them a letter in 1941 in June, a very cold and official letter, saying that the issuance, the procedure, a new procedure with the issuance of visas will become effective on July 1st, 1941. That is a week later. After July 1st, you may wish to communicate with the visa division regarding the cases in which you are now interested. So they never obtained a visa from the US, although their daughter was living here in New Bedford with her husband. And they died in Auschwitz a year and a month later. Andre's family was a military family, not only his father, who had fought in World War I, but also his mother's uncles, or his mother's two brothers, were officers in the Polish army. One of them, a very highly placed chief of staff for General Pilsudski. During their time in Germany, Max and Regina had originally come from Galicia. But during their time in Germany, Max owned a series of shoe stores, or a small chain of shoe stores, including this one, the Schuarenhaus. And you can see Max Scheinmann on the kind of mirrored top front of the store. And when the family, Max moved his family to France in 1933, he then established another store, which was called the American Wholesaler. This is also a before and after of Andre in his young years. On the right, he's playing chess with his friend Ewald Schmidt, who was the son of the big newspaper publisher in Dusseldorf. Der Mittag. And Ewald and his father never joined the Nazi party. So Ewald was sent to die on the Russian front, made to hold an impossible position during the war fighting for Germany. And André is fourth from right on the top photo. You can see him with his sister Mady, who's third from right. They were members of a tennis club in Bruyères-Nartois. And André also ran a subsidiary store for sporting goods. He was crazy about tennis, and so he sold tennis articles and tennis products. So this map of France shows the impossible position that his parents were in, living on the top part of the map of France around Lille, which was administered by the Nazis as part of Germany. And it was part of Belgium, and it was forbidden to cross the line from that red zone into the lighter orange zone, which was a closed zone, so that if people actually fled, as André's parents did, to Paris, they only, only non-Jews could actually cross the borders. But once they crossed, they couldn't go. No one could go back. So André's parents, were spirited across with less than 24 hours notice and spent the last year before they were sent to Auschwitz in Paris. And the places where André operated, as you saw on the map, were part of the coastal military zone where entry was prohibited. This is probably at the beginning of the war in Paris. And André's on the right, and you can see his parents there. Sorry. His parents, Max and Regina, and Regina's sister, sister-in-law, who survived the war with her family in the outskirts of Paris, hiding in a house in the suburbs. Interestingly enough, André never told me that his great uncles were world-class illusionists who toured the world, much like Houdini, with elaborate stage productions. And I think that the illusionist aspect of being a spy really is part of André's heritage, although he never mentioned it. But I found out through his cousin. So André and his father turned in their passports in 1939 and applied for the French army. Only André was taken. His father was too old and not well. But you can see at the top of his registration booklet, first of all, you can see that he registered for the French army under his birth name, Joseph Scheinmann, born in Germany. And at the top, in red, someone has written, does not possess French nationality. Heads up. Later in the French army, André was given an alias so that if he was taken by the Germans, they wouldn't detect that he had a German name. So he's given the French name of André Pulvé. And he wrote one of the things that I realized when I got his memoir, which was really a dictated mass of pages, that he didn't have a CV. So I asked him for one, and he dashed one off, which is just impeccable in terms of the presentation of the essentials. And so you can see that here this page talks about him looking for work after the French defeat. And then he became a representative of the French railroads to the occupying authorities, which was a title he gave himself when he, with his boss's agreement, in order to work with his boss, who was an MI6 agent also from probably before the war, married to a British woman. And So Andre was then able to, as he says, organize a network of sabotage and intelligence across all of Brittany and found a contact with Network 31. So his number became 31AQ, his agent number. You can see here his interpreter pass. It's probably half of his pass, but he saved it, and in his archives, it remained for us to see that with both the German stamp and the French authority stamp, he was able to circulate day and night, Tag and Nacht, as interpreter for the French railroads with the German authorities. To put a face on some of the people that he probably worked with, these were two women in the resistance who were students and also worked with their parents in a hotel right across from the railroad headquarters in Rennes. One of them, the one on the left, died in the camps. The one on the right survived to write her story. André was known as André Pulvé during the war. His alias, as you see on the upper left, was Le Neveu, the nephew, because he worked with Thomas Green. So he worked with Uncle Tom in the British Secret Services. But after the war, it was only in 1951 that he took his original name back. So then all of his French documents had to be redone under his real name because originally they were under his alias for the first years after the war. So he describes here, I don't know if you can read it, he represented the railroads, the Société Nationale des Chemins de Fer, at all meetings with the Germans on the subject of transport of raw materials bound for Germany, troops, construction supplies for their bases, and so on. I slept an average of 4 hours, needing to conduct my professional and clandestine activity at the same time. So also from the French government ledgers are records of his agents, the people he worked with. And as you can see at the top, I think you can see that this is for, you can see, well, here in the middle, you can see Wilbortz, Mrs. Wilbortz, who was recruited here on the right, the middle bar on the right, recruited by 31AQ. Remember, that's Andre's agent name. And then underneath that is the record of his daughter, Yvette, who was later known as Marie-Josée Chambard-Delot. And she is said to have helped her parents in the réseau, in the network. In 2000, she wrote to André, because I had gotten back in touch with her on his behalf, and she wrote, I learned from your memoir the extent of your actions as a secret agent, which I only knew part of. And I congratulate you very, very much for that. Be assured of my esteem and my old friendship, which we began during the year 1941-1942. After the war, the British Intelligence Corps, which had run most of the earliest French networks, and had run a lot of the resistance in all of Europe, came back in mop-up operations to map out who had been working for them. And you can see in the middle, on the right side of the middle bar, Turbin, which was André's boss at the railroads, and Pulvé. Mrs. Wilbortz is on top of that. And then there are other names there that appear in André's papers and in other files. This is from the French National Archives on the George France, which was the other name, the post-war name for Network 31. This is an old postcard of showing the railroad station at Rennes, where André's boss had an office with a window on the top floor. And André's suggestion to his boss on the first day that André went to work there, and André immediately detected and also had done research about his boss. So he realized that his boss hated the Germans and was probably involved in resistance. So he suggested to his boss that he would undertake to maintain and initiate the contacts with agents so as not to jeopardize his boss's safety. And he said, I'll come to you, if there's a technical matter or something of great importance. But he said, otherwise, why don't you, make me the front man so that so you'll be protected. So at one point, that's what his boss did, and Louis Turban. And at one point, a couple of men came to him who were actually from de Gaulle's incipient networks, which were just starting up in 1940, the end of 41. And so his boss said to them, look, I don't get involved in things like that. He said, you can talk to my secretary. I don't know what he's into, if he's interested, but you can talk to him. I'll send him down, sit on that bench in the park, and I'll send him down to you if he wants to talk to you. So that's in fact what happened. And that's how André, whose file is on the right, as you can see, met the Le Tac brothers. On the left is Joël Le Tac, who was into sabotage and was one of de Gaulle's first agents to be sent into France for sabotage. And Yves Le Tac, who may have been an MI6 agent even before the war, but like André, was much more interested in intelligence and also was interested in propaganda. And André and Yves in the middle remained friends to the end of their life. The photograph of him, beautiful photograph from before the war, was sent to me by Yves' daughter, Monique. So now we're back to how Joël and Yves joined up with André and got him over to London in January of 1942. They were helped by their mother, Monique, their mother of Yvonne Le Tac, who owned this house right on the coast of Brittany. And although all of the houses along that coastline had been taken over by the Germans because it was a very strategic location, she simply refused to let them occupy her house. So from that house, they were able to use it as a jumping off point to rejoin the ships that would take them to England. André wrote a beautiful obituary of Yvonne Le Tac in a newsletter which was created after the war for people who had infiltrated France and left from France for England, people of the moon, gens de la lune. And so André said in part, Yvonne Le Tac participated in all our departures. She pulled out the canoe hidden less than 20 yards from a house full of German soldiers. And she would lead us to a promontory carrying a grenade in each hand, ready to do anything to ensure our departure, pacing along the cliffs with those of us who were to leave later, walking us around the German sentries, and she would not go home until the last of us were embarked. So they left from that place marked on the map with an A, approximately, and they went over to Falmouth or Penzance, or in between the two. And then from there, they were met when the ship came in, they first went out by canoe to the motor gunboat and then were taken across the channel. And when they arrived, the French de Gaulle Secret Services met them and tried to get André to go with them. But André said, no, I want to work with the British. So they split up. Yves and Joël went with the French and the special operations executive, and André went to see Uncle Tom with the MI6. So this is just a little note. Sometimes this is looking through the archives at Kew, the British National Archives, and sometimes one finds something like this, which was from Lieutenant Holdsworth, who piloted the boat, and that took them across. But earlier in September of 1941, they crossed in January 42. He wrote a little note about how they could use the lobster pots. And so I'll just read it in case you can't see it. Inshore along the Breton coast, the shellfish industry proceeds just as it did last year, the year before, and since the beginning of time. Every day, men in open boats will be hauling their lobster pots. I believe we can turn this fact to advantage if one of your agents can contact a crabber who agrees to shoot his pots in a particular area and haul, instead of lobsters the next day, sea-tight containers of this and that, which would, of course, be weaponry. Within navigational reason, we could shoot the pots pretty well anywhere from the Ile de Vierge to the Haut-Light, which is exactly where André and Yves and Joël and other secret agents departed from on their trip over to London. This is the motor gunboat number 314 that was used for André's crossing, both over and back. So André's boss, as I mentioned, was, and you can see in his handwritten CV, my boss was Mr. Thomas Green, who took care of me when I was in England. And the French section was Commander Dunderdale. So here's André's little black book, I think dating from right after the war, with Uncle Tom on the G page, and Uncle Tom's Paris phone number, a Passy phone number. So this is from Nigel West's book on MI6, and it's probably a little hard to see, but the Paris station of the SIS organization at the start of the war, September 39, in Paris shows the names Dunderdale and Green as heading up the Paris office. Here's André's little black book, again with Commander Dunderdale and his London address, 2 London addresses, actually. Here's another record of André's time in London, the planning meeting for the return in the office of Captain Pickett Wicks, who was the special operations liaison between MI6 and the de Gaulle networks. And André, I have it on good authority, is the one that's mentioned, identified as AN other, because these documents, MI6 does not release any documents, but the special operations executive that worked with them during the war, that was an offshoot during the war, actually their documents do have traces of André, which I was able to find because of Joël Le Tac and Yves Le Tac being special operations executive and de Gaulle network liaisons. So here's the meeting that, including the 2 people who took them back, Holdsworth and Richards. So André sums up in a paragraph in his memoir what he did in London. That is, he said almost nothing because he was sworn to the Official Secrets Act. But of course, we do know what he did, and the book traces a lot of that, the trade-offs that André engineered so that he could come back with 2 new missions and got rid of his saboteurs who went with Joël Le Tac to de Gaulle. But one of the things we do have is Andre's disguises, which were created by MI6 by professional staging. They had professional theater designers who created disguises for their agents. And these are his disguises, which he sent to his sister in the United States, which was his only communication with her during the war. So she wondered what the heck he was doing in London and why he was dressed this way. And of course, she didn't find out until after the war, thank goodness. So when Andre came back, and after his time in the camps, which I'll go into in a minute, he got a very rare document for an MI6 agent, which was a letter of recommendation that he had worked with MI6 and that he, his mission when he left England by clandestine maritime operation was to follow the usual courses, parachuting and so on. And after being arrested, he spent 40 months in prison and camp in Germany. And then we only have to congratulate ourselves for Mr. Polvet, misspelled, who showed himself to be perfectly behaved. And it's signed by Thomas Green and written in French. On the same day, the 22nd of June, 1945, that he received this letter of recommendation, he also took the MI6 agent, Commander Gentry, to recoup the 500,000 French francs, which the British had given him, Andre, to start 2 new networks. And so he got a receipt for the return of this very large sum of money, which would have paid for a network for several months had he been able to create it. Unfortunately, he was arrested before that, but also a very rare document. And a banknote receipt showing the sum of 500,000 francs that had been deposited in the account of his friend, Lucien Rauch in Rennes. The head of George France Network, Group 31 Network, was Madame Louis, a very controversial figure, especially after the war. But she was arrested with a tremendous amount of documents, including the lists and many lists of her agents, of many of her agents and what they were paid, because she was an MI6 agent, so she was paying them, from MI6 funds. And when the Germans arrested her, she spoke seemingly very willingly to them. There's a 42-page indictment of her, which contains a tremendous amount of information. It did enormous harm to her agents. Dozens of people were killed immediately, and many were forced into the camps as a result of her testimony. But you can see that she's mentioning the interpreter André Polvet with the agent number 31AQ, and his other name, another alias was Martin. And at the bottom, you can see that she also named Turban, his boss. Well, the result was that if they weren't killed, many of his network were sent to Natzweiler, which you can see on the bottom left, on the border between France and Germany. Actually, Alsace was taken back by Germany during the war. And so although we can say that it's the only concentration camp located on French soil, the French, always say, no, it wasn't in France, it was in Germany. So there you are. The camp still exists as a French national monument since 1960. Many of the barracks have been torn down, but 2 remain at the bottom, the prison and the experimentation chambers, and 2 at the top, which you can see a little bit of. And this is at a commemoration, the time of a commemoration ceremony that I attended, a Norwegian survivor looking over the camp. The camp was also photographed by the Royal Air Force while it was functioning in July 1944. You can see the aerial photograph with the barracks at the top and then the location of the gas chamber in the middle. And the signage at the time that I photographed this in, I think, 1998, shows the gas chamber was located where the bar and restaurant also were located, whereas the camp was a short distance away, as you can see from the aerial. André and his fellow agents were sent to Natzweiler under the night and fog decree, Nacht und Nebel. And there's an interesting story about how it was named that, but we can talk about that later maybe. You can see that the NNs were special prisoners at the camp. They didn't wear the striped uniform, which people have come to associate with the concentration camps. That was a uniform that was used at Dachau, certainly, but not at Natzweiler, where they just reused confiscated clothing. But the NNs had to paint the name NN and do a special bullseye on their back. So that they could be more easily tormented by the guards. The one thing that's not very well known, I certainly didn't know about it, was that all the camps on Reich territory, that is in German territory during the war, were to be cleansed of Jews, so that the directorate of the concentration camps at Oranienburg sent out on October 5th of 1942 a directive that all of the camps in Germany, Buchenwald, Dachau, Flossenburg, Gross-Rosen, Mauthausen, Natzweiler, Neuengamme, Niederhagen, Ravensbrück, Sachsenhausen, and Stutthof, were to be emptied of their Jews. So on October 7th, 1942, 32 Jews were sent from Natzweiler were sent to Auschwitz. This doesn't mean that there weren't Jews at the camp. There were many secret Jews like André. And there were also Jews toward the end of the war, many Jews who worked in its slave labor dependencies. So André ended up the war in Dachau because Natzweiler in September of 44 was emptied of its prisoners as the Allies were moving to liberate France. And there again, André, with his knowledge of German, had become an interpreter and was able to join the International Prisoners Committee, which was a kind of an incipient leadership of the prisoners, which was formed by the prisoners in expectation of the end of the war and having to manage the camp when the Germans left. So, but you can see on the bottom, you can see his number when he entered with his mugshot when he entered the Konzentrationslager Natzweiler on the 10th of July, 1943, with his number 4368. And on the bottom, when he got to Dachau, of course, his number was much higher. It was a bigger camp. It was later on, 101739. But you can see he's also shown to be an NN prisoner on that little ID card on the left. So when the camp was liberated, André wrote in his memoir, April 29th, 1945, a rumor spread through the camp, the Americans are here. I left my barrack to go to the camp gate to greet our liberators. A few shots were heard, the SS guards surrendered and opened the gates, and the first Americans came through. I ran to the gate and threw my arms around the first GI. This one took his helmet off, and beautiful long blonde hair fell onto his shoulders. The first man in was a woman photojournalist. The surprise passed. I hugged her again. Uh, on September 1st, 1944, the man who did the drawing that you saw of the NN prisoners being tormented at the camp with stones, Henri Gaillot, did a drawing of André. And then in the middle is André posing after the war in his Dachau stripes. And a photo of him when he returned to Dachau for the 50th commemoration ceremonies, where he said he met in Munich, which was, where Dachau was located, basically. In 1955, a man accosted him on the street and said, "They should have killed you all." When Andre returned, he immediately began to try to normalize his situation, be registered again with the French army, rejoined his membership in the army, and he received this fairly rare certificate. It is a certificate that other prisoners got on liberation, but Andre's name, of course, has been written in on the top and signed by de Gaulle. Answering the call of France at peril to your life, you rallied to Free French forces. You are the volunteer team of good companions who kept our country in the war and in honor. You were in the first rank of those who allowed her to win victory. At the moment when the goal has been reached, I wish to thank you in friendship, simply in the name of France. So here he is registered in the French ledgers as an interpreter. You can see at bottom right, interpreter for the SNCF, the National Railroads, adjunct of Turban for renseignement, which means intelligence, recruitment, and arrested the 4th of February 1942, liberated May, and signed by Madame Louis with her stamp for the Groupe Georges France. So after the war, Andre actually worked for the resistance longer than he had worked for the resistance during the war. The photo of him is from after the war. You can see his parachute badge. Actually, he's wearing two of them, one from the French and one from the British. But he dealt with hundreds of agent names and researched their actions, what they had done, and registered them into the ledgers of the French government, like the ledgers you saw in a couple of the documents. So this is just one of many pages of names that were. He had a very great resistor helping him, Madame Seidel, Christiane Seidel, and she composed a lot of the lists and biographies, as did he, to research what their service had been. It was a cross-section of French society that worked in the resistance. This was a letter recommending someone for honors. She was a duchess, and his letter reads here, there was a tower in the castle off the woods that counted for 7 beds, open day and night for the convenience of 100 people. Came who wanted. You have a great cause to register the Countess de Lorgeril, and I have no doubt that with your savoir-faire, you will succeed. Signed by Deveau. So there are many, many hundreds of documents like this that Andre kept after he registered his agents. And I think it's a unique collection of the backstory of the resistance. You can see there's a lot more in here than appears in the ledgers, and very touching. Another interesting letter, both of these letters were in his archive, which he kept secret. He never even told me about it. His son discovered it in 2018 and really allowed me to finish the book with the help of this backstory. But some of the letters, for instance, this one is sent by Suzanne Wilbortz. And she writes to him, "My dear the nephew, allow me to tell you that you are nothing but an old fool. I'm going to refresh your memory. When during my interrogations the Germans talked to me of your trip to London, I always denied it to their face. Ah, Pulvé, but he's half cracked. That trip to London never existed except in his imagination. He was incapable of doing something like that. Boast about it, maybe, but execute it never." So apparently, Andre had heard about something about this and hadn't understood what he was hearing. So now she's giving it to him firsthand. "That's simply what I was alluding to in my letter," she writes. "It had no pejorative meaning. It was only a memory of a trick thus played on the Germans." So, there's many touching documents which I included in the book from his secret archive of this kind of bravery. This one affects him, which which shows the bravery of Suzanne Wilbortz in disguising whatever she knew of him and what he actually had done during the war. So after the war, he was still in the army. He signed himself out of the army in a rather his last act of daring do, because his boss in the army was going to send all the resistors to under his command to Indochina, because his boss had been a pitaniste and a collaborator of sorts, and so he didn't like the resistors under his command. So Andre signed himself out of the army. But later, his status was made more normal, as I describe in the book. And even when he came to America, he served in the French reserves, as you can see here from the photo of him tasting soup at Fort Drum. After the war, he also met his wife, Claire Diamond, who was a brilliant interpreter working for the RAF, whose translations were sent to Bletchley Park, and who also misguided the German pilots on their operations, so that they were confused as to where they were supposed to go. And because she impersonated Luftwaffe operators, was Operation Corona was the name of this spoofing and jamming operation. So he really met his match in Claire, and they had a son, Michel, and now have grandchildren and great grands, and you can see them coming to America here on the left in 1951, and then later in life in Arosa in the middle, and not sure where the photograph of the two of them in sunglasses are, but I call that photograph Two Spooks. These are later in life photographs of Andre. On the right is his last ID card from the French government, which identifies him as of French nationality, although he also became an American citizen. And on the left, an earlier card, but already with his original name, Joseph Scheinmann, again, as a voluntary combatant in the resistance, showing his location at Union Street in New Bedford, and that he was born in Munich. So he had regained his identity by then. And I guess that concludes the presentation that I had for tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope it hasn't been too quick a tour of a very complicated history, but thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that incredible presentation. We've
Thank
gotten
you.
some great questions from our viewers already, which I'll ask. But just a reminder to our viewers, if you're inspired to ask a question while we're speaking, definitely feel free to put it into the Zoom Q&A. So I'll start with sort of a general question that one of our viewers submitted. They're wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what it was like for you personally to work directly with Andre, and if the process of, you know, writing and researching and creating this book was different for you than your previous work?
It was very different. It was very different. I had started out as a photojournalist, but when I visited Natzweiler for the first time in 1985, in a sense, I never left the camp. Um, but when I met Andre, I had met other survivors. I'd gone to the memorial services. I translated memoirs. I met quite a few of them. My first visit back in 91 was with a non-Jewish survivor of the camp who Andre remembered as being a
Mhm.
difficult man. So he was much older than Andre and probably one of the oldest people to survive the camps. He was already in his mid 40s. So he was a toughie. He was a toughie among toughies. And, Andre managed them all. But so Andre was just a very kind and had an extremely gentle and chivalrous demeanor. He understood that, and I still think I disappointed him in the sense that when I was able to talk to him about his memoir, I was able to competently, organize it into chapters and paragraphs and get his CV. And I had a perfectly, wonderful book, but I knew nothing of the resistance, the French archives, the National Archives. The British National Archives had not opened their wartime archives. I hadn't discovered the many books that mention Andre that are included in the bibliography, of course, or part of the book.
Mhm.
So I really was really related to him more on a personal level
Mhm.
than gleaning information about the resistance and his work with the secret services, which he might not have told me about anyway.
Mhm.
But was very, I call it a friendship that endured way after his death because as I discovered more about him and about, the details of his work, then, he only grew for me in nobility and
Mhm.
in the actions that he had taken, which were amazingly courageous and also generous for
Mhm.
the people that he helped in the camp, which the communists attested to in their books, and for his personal kindness to me and to my daughter. So what I think I gained here was an amazing friendship that lasted for half of my life. And he had um, one. The war was not a victory for him. They all
Mhm.
wanted to survive to outlive the Nazis, and
Mhm.
they many speak of it as he did. That if they were the last person to survive, they wanted to see the end of the Reich, which they knew would come. But for him, the war was not a victory
Mhm.
because of the loss of his parents. And I think he blamed himself for that all his life, that he had gotten so wrapped up in his resistance activities that he, he always wanted to rise in the ranks of MI6 so he could take them over to London. And that was his intention, was once he had gone to London once, he thought he could put them on the next boat out and get them out. But of course, he wasn't able to do that because he was arrested immediately upon his
Mhm.
return. But it was a heartache for him for the rest of his life and a defeat. I don't know if I answered the question or said too much, but
No, you did. That
thank
was
you.
a wonderful answer. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Um, we have another question that's asking about your research process, and this person is wondering, if any of your research for the book was complicated by the fact that Andre went by so many different aliases, if that made things a bit difficult for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think what was most difficult for me in the research process was that I was in the United States and the
Mm,
records were in the National Archives of France and Great Britain. So I had a great deal of help. I had created a website about Andre in 2006. And
mhm,
people started to come to me with their own research project, which
mhm,
sort of abutted, the story of Andre, or affected or was about him also. So, for instance, Tim Spicer is one of the people who came to me who included Andre in his book, A Dangerous Enterprise, which was
mhm,
about the cross-channel traffic between France and Britain of agents and resistors. And then after that, Tim Spicer came to me actually to look at Andre's archive
mhm,
for his next book, A Suspicion of Spies, which is about Wilfred Dunderdale, the head of
mhm,
MI6 for France. And, Andre figures in that with a few pages and Madame Louis. But the fact that the archives did not have digitized copies of their
mhm,
records for many years after they opened. Let's say they opened in around 2005, and it's only recently that some of these records, a lot of them have been digitized now.
mhm,
But when I was working on them, I had to rely on researchers in France and England
mhm,
to get the copies, get scans, and or photo. Actually, they weren't scanned, but to
mhm,
photograph them with their cameras, which had different results. So and most didn't charge me. One
mhm,
researcher in France charged me, who was actually a French government employee, but he wanted to have a good lunch, so I subsidized that endeavor a little
mhm,
bit. But no, it was a very lengthy process. And now with AI, I think I could process these scans at a tremendous rate of speed. But
mhm,
at the time, even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I was going through hundreds, if not thousands, of documents, not
mhm,
just from his file, because his file in the French National Archives exists, but it's based on the files of the Special Operations Executive, and he
mhm,
only is there in besides the French government archives records, which after the war, listed him and his agents.
mhm,
But the Special Operations Executive has the files on the attacks, and he only
mhm,
appears with his as André Maurice, and then his last name is blanked out. So
mhm,
MI6 went through those files before they were released, and covered up the names of their
mhm,
agents, or at least Andre's last name. But you could tell it was him because it was André Maurice, and he was there with the attacks, on that trip in January 42, and they also listed his alias, Le Neveu.
mhm.
So it was obvious that it was Andre, but if you didn't know who he had been working with, it would have not yielded the results that I was able to get, because I knew enough of the story to look up the people he had worked with.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum, which you can do at mjhnyc.org/support. We also hope to see you for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events. Both of those links are in the chat for you as well. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great night, and we hope to see you soon.